Unfortunately, we will all go through something called tough times. Some will be big and some will be small, like the ending of a marriage or the loss of a loved one. Maybe it's a relationship that ends or a friendship that doesn't work out. Maybe it's the loss of a job or you're just not happy and you can't find joy in life anymore. The reality is we will all go through this. Before we talk about this, I want to let you know, hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Will Del Val, and I want to give you just a few Bible verses that you can use during tough times. Because the reality is God does see you even right now. That right now you might feel lost or alone in the world, but let me tell you, God does care. And he does see and understand your suffering. I always found it interesting in the book of James in the Bible, it says this: count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let your steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete and lack in nothing. What a bizarre concept. It's very upside down thinking that when I'm going through various trials or going through hard times, to consider it pure joy. How can you have joy in the midst of trials? Well, see, joy is different than happiness. Happiness is a fleeting feeling. It can come and go. But joy is something that can remain even when we go through tough times. See, before, when I was really reading this verse, I couldn't understand it until I went through tough times. I was dealing with a lot of heavy issues. I'm someone who has dealt with depression. I have dealt with the loss of friends and loved ones. But now I'm in a place where I can have joy because I know who brings pure joy. See, even though I might go through suffering, because I've placed my faith in Jesus, I can have hope and joy that it's gonna be okay in the end. Yes, the situation may look bleak, but at the end of the day, I know that Jesus is working things out for my good and can take what the enemy meant for evil and turn it for good. One of the ways I know this is that Jesus understands. In Hebrews 2:18, it says that Jesus went through suffering and he went through temptation, so he understands us when we go through suffering and we go through temptation. So one of the ways we can have joy in the midst of suffering is to remember Jesus understands. Jesus understands our suffering because he's also suffered. Another thing I like to remind people is that God cares about you. It says in 1 Peter 5:7, cast your cares or cast your anxieties onto God because he cares. That right now, you can take all the stuff you're dealing with, the loss of that job, the issues in that relationship, the insecurities you may have, or even the grief you may have of losing a loved one. And you can go to God and say, God, I don't know what to do with this. I need your help. And when you say that to God and you begin to pray, you can start to feel that he cares, because God does care about you. Even if you're lost right now, God sees you. And he's calling you to himself. And if you find the love of God and you understand what it is and you hold on to it, knowing he cares about you, you can have joy even amidst tough times. So just remember, point 2 is that God cares for you. First one is Jesus understands and Jesus suffered, but now also he cares about you. Another thing that I think is so important and what I love, it's actually one of my favorite verses in the Bible, is found in this book called Psalms. It's in the book of Psalms, and it's in chapter 34, and it's in verse 18, and it says this: the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those crushed in spirit. That God, when you're feeling brokenhearted, come on, how many of us have felt brokenhearted before? Or maybe you're feeling brokenhearted right now. Scripture is saying the Lord is near. God is close to the brokenhearted. So right now, in the midst of your suffering, God sees you. He cares about you. He understands you and is close. I think when we remember those things, it's a lot easier to go through suffering, because on this side of heaven, the reality is suffering will happen. It's not an if, it's almost a guarantee. Suffering is going to come. But we don't have to lose ourselves in the suffering. We can be upset. We can suffer and grieve, but we can still have joy because we know who is joy? We know Jesus. Today, if you don't know Jesus, I encourage you, put your trust into him. And if you're like, hey, I just don't feel God right now. Well, guess what? Scripture tells us, even if you're brokenhearted, God is close. So remember, Jesus understands. God cares about you, and God is close. Today, put your trust in him. And remember, he cares about you. Till next time.